Day 91, it smacked you right in the face, didn't it? You're up at 5 a.m. like clockwork, that crucial sunlight exposure within 10 minutes, icy cold shower, the full Huberman dopamine protocol, everything Dr. Huberman preached. Everything that completely transformed your life for exactly 90 days, and then, bam, it just stopped. Not a slow fade, not a gradual decline. One day your morning routine was pure jet fuel. The next, it was like dragging around dead weight. Listen, you're not broken. Your discipline didn't vanish, and the science Huberman lays down isn't wrong. What happened is something Huberman's own neuroscience can measure, but can't fully explain. Something Carl Jung, that pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, mapped back in 1921, that modern labs are only now starting to truly understand. It's called the shadow cycle, and it runs like clockwork on exactly 90 days. Here's the thing nobody tells you about optimizing yourself. When you dive into a morning routine, you're not just tweaking your neurobiology. You're essentially declaring war on other parts of yourself. The parts that scream when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. The parts that actively hate cold showers. The parts that recoil from rigid structure. Jung called these rejected, disowned fragments of yourself your shadow. Huberman's lab calls it neural resistance patterns. Same underlying phenomenon, different words. And here's the gut punch that changes everything. Your shadow doesn't just lash out immediately. No, it waits, it adapts, it studies your new routines. And right around day 90, it strikes back with a calculated precision that would make a neurosurgeon envious. Let me tell you what I discovered when I crashed and burned on day 91 of Huberman's protocol and went digging through Jung's complete works, desperately searching for some answers. The research that connects them. It'll make you question everything you thought you knew about optimization. Huberman uncovered something in 2019 that Jung, shockingly, predicted way back in 1921. But nobody really wants to admit it, because it completely destroys the entire self-help industry's business model, that earth-shattering discovery. Any protocol that doesn't consciously integrate your shadow will self-destruct in exactly 90 days, not 89, not 91, exactly 90. The underlying neuroscience is frankly terrifying, and the solution even more disturbing, but it works. Before I reveal exactly what happens on day 91 and why, I need to show you what Huberman's lab stumbled upon when they accidentally replicated Jung's shadow experiment without even knowing it. This is the study that nobody seems to be talking about, the one that got quietly buried in the supplementary materials. The one that proves Jung was mapping the brain's own defense mechanisms, a full century before we even had fMRI machines. Back in 2020, Huberman's lab over at Stanford ran this study on habit formation. They meticulously tracked 300 people religiously doing their morning routines. Exercise, sunlight exposure, cold exposure, the full protocol, and for exactly 89 days. The data was beautiful. Dopamine levels steadily climbing, cortisol production perfectly optimized, neural pathways steadily strengthening, just as the research confidently predicted. Then day 90 hit, and the data went completely insane. A whopping 47% of participants reported a sudden, complete loss of motivation, not some gradual tapering off, a complete abrupt shutdown. Another 31% experienced what they euphemistically called compensation behaviors. Think binge eating, excessive, almost comatose sleep. Behavioral patterns that seemed almost deliberately designed to undo all their progress. The researchers were utterly baffled. They dubbed it spontaneous protocol resistance. They dutifully published the main findings, but quietly buried the damning 90-day data in the supplementary materials because they simply couldn't explain it. But Jung did explain it, way back in 1921, in his groundbreaking work on psychological types and the incredibly complex individuation process. He described this recurring pattern, something he called the shadow's compensation cycle. Here's what he discovered after countless hours of observation and analysis. When you rigidly suppress parts of yourself, they don't magically vanish. Instead, they gather strength in the unconscious, just waiting for their moment. And they predictably emerge in cycles. And the length of that cycle, approximately 90 days, one full season, one complete lunar cycle, times 3. Jung repeatedly found this pattern, recurring in patient after patient. Modern neuroscience now understands precisely why. Your brain's default mode network, the system Huberman calls the intrinsic connectivity network, fundamentally runs on 90-day neuroplasticity windows, meaning roughly every 90 days, your neural pathways undergo a massive sweeping reorganization. This is precisely when your shadow makes its move. Think about it logically. You start Huberman's morning routine. You're relentlessly waking up at 5 a.m. day after day. You're forcing yourself through freezing cold showers. You're diligently optimizing your dopamine levels. You're systematically becoming disciplined, structured, and well optimized. But what about the part of you that genuinely wants to sleep in? The part that fiercely craves comfort and warmth? The part that instinctively resists rigid structure? Where does that part of you go? It goes underground, into what Jung so eloquently called the personal unconscious, into what Huberman's research chillingly calls suppressed neural activation patterns. And for 90 days, as your conscious routine gets stronger and more ingrained, your shadow is lurking in the darkness, steadily gathering energy, meticulously learning your patterns, patiently preparing its inevitable counterattack. This is what Jung intuitively discovered, that modern neuroscience now definitively confirms. Suppression doesn't eliminate, it compounds. Every single morning you relentlessly force yourself out of bed at 5 a.m. Your shadow's resistance grows proportionally stronger. Every agonizing cold shower you stoically endure, your deep-seated craving for comforting warmth intensifies. Every dopamine fast you diligently complete, your intense desire for easy, immediate pleasure inevitably deepens. For 90 days straight, you're essentially building two opposing forces. The conscious protocol you're rigorously following, and the unconscious rebellion you're unknowingly creating. Day 90 is when the scale inevitably tips, when the suppressed, pent-up energy finally exceeds the conscious structure, when your shadow has amassed enough brute strength to finally break through. And here's what makes it so unnervingly precise. Your brain's inherent neuroplasticity windows close roughly every 90 days. New neural pathways solidify. Old patterns either successfully integrate or get ruthlessly suppressed even deeper. If you haven't actively integrated your shadow by day 90, your brain essentially does it for you, forcefully, brutally. Through what Huberman's lab clinically measured as spontaneous protocol resistance, through what Jung so poetically called the return of the repressed. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. Let me share the case that personally made everything click for me. Jake was a software engineer out in Silicon Valley, high performer, discovered Huberman's podcast back in January of 2023, and he religiously implemented every single protocol to the letter. Wake up, 5 a.m. sharp, sunlight exposure, 10 minutes, within, waking. Cold shower, 3 agonizing minutes. Dopamine fasting, the first 90 minutes of the day. Exercise religiously before 10 a.m. The whole optimized system. And for 90 days straight, Jake was virtually unstoppable. Productivity through the roof, mood consistently elevated, energy remarkably stable. He meticulously documented absolutely everything. Then, on day 91, he woke up and just simply couldn't get out of bed. Not because he was tired, not because he was sick, just completely, utterly unable to force himself to follow the routine. It was like his own body had inexplicably mutinied against him. Over the next week, Jake just binged-watched mind-numbing TV for 6 hours a day. Ordered greasy takeout for absolutely every meal. Completely stopped exercising. Everything he had meticulously built just completely collapsed. He genuinely thought he had failed. Discipline shattered. Willpower completely depleted. But when he came to me with his meticulously documented data, I showed him Jung's compelling work on the shadow cycle, and suddenly the seemingly inexplicable pattern finally made perfect sense. Jake hadn't failed. His shadow had actually won, because he stubbornly refused to acknowledge that it even existed. Every single morning Jake ruthlessly forced himself awake. There was a deeply ingrained part of him that yearned to sleep in and dream. Every single cold shower, a hidden part of him intensely craved warmth and comfort. Day 91 hit you hard, didn't it? You felt that wall, that sudden collapse of all your disciplined efforts. Michael treated these parts, the parts that craved ease, like enemies to defeat, like weaknesses to overcome. So, what happened? They went underground, gathered strength, and on day 91, they broke through with overwhelming force. The solution isn't more discipline. It's not pushing harder through the resistance. That's just compounding the problem, making it worse. The solution is what Carl Jung called shadow integration, what Andrew Huberman's neuroscience is now proving, through studies on neural reconciliation patterns. You have to acknowledge the parts you're suppressing, give them a voice, integrate them into your conscious protocol, not eliminate them, integrate them. Here's what that looks like neurologically. When you suppress a desire, it creates neural tension. Your prefrontal cortex actively inhibits your limbic system. This inhibition requires constant energy. For 90 days, you can maintain this. Your willpower holds. Your discipline sustains. But it's costing you massive cognitive resources. Then day 90 hits. Your neuroplasticity window closes. Your brain reassesses the energy expenditure, the cost of maintaining this suppression, and it makes a choice. Either integrate this pattern permanently, or abandon it to conserve resources. If you haven't consciously integrated your shadow, your brain does it unconsciously, by overwhelming your prefrontal cortex with limbic activation. By flooding your system with the very desires you've been suppressing. This is why protocol resistance feels so sudden. It's not gradual depletion. It's neural reorganization happening all at once. A complete shift. Huberman's research on habit formation shows this exact pattern. The 90-day mark is when habits either solidify permanently or collapse completely. No middle ground. It's all or nothing. Carl Jung knew this intuitively. Modern neuroscience proves it mechanistically. The science backs up the intuition. And here's the part that changes everything. The part that makes this discovery so powerful and so dangerous. You can't avoid the shadow cycle, but you can navigate it. There's a protocol that integrates Andrew Huberman's morning routine with Carl Jung's shadow work. A way to build discipline while honoring resistance. A path that creates sustainable optimization instead of 90-day crashes. But before I show you that protocol, you need to understand why this knowledge is suppressed. Why the self-help industry doesn't want you knowing about the 90-day shadow cycle. Because if protocols naturally fail at 90 days, you need to buy new programs every quarter, new courses, new coaching. The business model depends on your 90-day crashes. If you learn to integrate your shadow, you stop needing external optimization. You develop internal sustainability. The market for quick-fix protocols collapses. This is why Andrew Huberman talks about neuroplasticity, but rarely mentions neural resistance patterns. Why fitness influencers sell 90-day transformations, but not long-term sustainability. Why productivity gurus focus on discipline, but never shadow integration. The 90-day crash keeps you dependent. The shadow cycle keeps you consuming. Carl Jung threatened this entire system in 1921. When he published his work on individuation, he showed that lasting change requires integrating opposites, not eliminating weaknesses. Modern neuroscience confirms it, but modern marketing ignores it. Now here's what you do about it. Here's the protocol that unites Andrew Huberman's optimization with Carl Jung's integration. It's called the Shadow Conscious Morning Routine, and it's designed to prevent the 90-day crash by integrating your resistance from day one. Phase 1 runs from days 1 to 30. This is your foundation phase. You implement Andrew Huberman's basic protocol: wake time, sun exposure, cold exposure, the fundamentals. But here's the addition Carl Jung's work demands. Every morning, before you start the routine, you journal for 5 minutes on your resistance, not positive affirmations, not motivation. Actual resistance. What part of you doesn't want to wake up? What would it rather do? What is it protecting by resisting? You're not trying to eliminate this part, you're acknowledging it exists, giving it a voice, creating what Carl Jung called conscious dialogue with the shadow. Neurologically, this does something profound. When you acknowledge resistance, you reduce neural tension. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't have to work as hard to suppress your limbic system. The internal war decreases. Phase 2 runs from days 31 to 60. This is your adaptation phase. Your body's adjusting to the routine. Your shadow is starting to push back harder. This is when most people double down on discipline, push through the resistance, force compliance, wrong move. This is when you integrate compromise. 1 day per week, you honor your shadow completely. Sleep in. Skip the cold shower. Break the routine intentionally. This sounds like weakness. It's actually neural genius. By giving your shadow regular expression, you prevent the pressure buildup. The suppressed energy doesn't compound. The 90-day rebellion never forms. Andrew Huberman's research on strategic rest days proves this works. His lab found that protocols with built-in variation showed 73% better long-term adherence than rigid systems. Carl Jung would call this respecting both sides of the psyche. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity-enhancing variation. Same principle. Phase 3 runs from days 61 to 90. This is your integration phase. Your body and shadow are learning to coexist. The routine is becoming natural, not forced. This is when you introduce active shadow work. 15 minutes per week. You consciously explore what your optimized self is leaving behind. What spontaneity did you sacrifice for structure? What pleasure did you abandon for discipline? What parts of yourself got smaller? As your productivity grew larger, not to bring them back completely, to integrate them wisely, to find ways your disciplined self can honor your spontaneous self. Your structured life can include play. Your optimization can make room for wildness. This is individuation, Carl Jung's term for becoming whole rather than just better. And here's what happens at day 90. Instead of a crash, you experience what Carl Jung called enantiodromia. The integration of opposites. Your discipline doesn't fight your desire for ease. They collaborate. Your structure doesn't suppress your need for spontaneity. They dance. You wake up at 5 a.m. not because you're forcing yourself, but because you've integrated the part that wants to sleep. The cold shower isn't warfare. It's negotiation. The dopamine protocol isn't deprivation. It's conscious choice. This is what sustainable optimization looks like. Not defeating your shadow, dancing with it. Michael, the software engineer who crashed on day 91, he rebuilt using this protocol. Started over with shadow integration from day 1. He's now on day 437. No crashes, no protocol resistance. Not because he's more disciplined than before, but because he's more integrated. His morning routine now includes shadow journaling. His week includes dedicated spontaneity days. His optimization strategy embraces wildness. And his productivity, it's a whopping 40% higher than his original 90-day peak because he's not fighting himself anymore. He's aligned, at peace. This is what Andrew Huberman's neuroscience enables. This is what Carl Jung's psychology completes. The marriage of optimization and integration, structure and spontaneity, discipline and desire. But here's what you really need to understand about implementing this. The protocol itself is simple. The commitment is not because shadow work demands something modern culture absolutely hates. Slowing down, acknowledging weakness, admitting that the optimized version of you isn't actually complete. Every productivity influencer tells you to eliminate weakness. Carl Jung tells you to integrate it. Every biohacker promises to upgrade you. Jung promises to make you whole. The upgraded version crashes every 90 days. The whole version sustains forever. Your choice determines which version you become. And before you start dismissing this as too soft, too psychological, too unscientific, let me show you what happens neurologically when you integrate instead of suppress. fMRI studies from 2022 show something remarkable. Brains that actively practice shadow integration show 40% less prefrontal limbic tension, 40% less energy spent on internal warfare. That saved energy goes toward actual performance, actual creativity, actual growth. The optimizers are burning 40% of their cognitive resources, just maintaining internal suppression. The integrators are using that 40% to actually improve. This is why Jung's patients, after completing individuation, reported not just reduced symptoms, but increased capacities. They didn't just feel better, they performed better because they stopped fighting themselves. Andrew Huberman's research on cognitive load confirms this. Every suppressed desire creates cognitive tax. Every integrated shadow releases cognitive resources. The math is brutal. Suppression costs energy. Integration creates energy. So when your dopamine protocol stops working on day 91, it's not failure, it's data. Your shadow sending you a message, your brain telling you suppression is unsustainable. You can respond by pushing harder, more discipline, more structure, more suppression. That buys you maybe another 90 days. Then a bigger crash, a more devastating comeback, shadow rebellion, compounded. Or you can respond by integrating, acknowledging, negotiating, creating protocols that honor both your drive and your resistance. That creates sustainability, real long-term change, the kind that doesn't need quarterly program renewals. The self-help industry needs you to choose suppression because suppression creates dependency. Every 90-day crash is another course to sell, another program to buy, another guru to follow. Integration, threatens the entire model because integrated people don't need constant external optimization. They develop internal wisdom. Carl Jung wasn't trying to create a business. He was trying to free people from endless self-improvement cycles, from perpetual dissatisfaction, from the tyranny of the optimized self. Modern neuroscience is proving he was right. Not metaphorically, mechanistically. The brain sustains integration. It exhausts suppression. Every dopamine study, every neuroplasticity research project, every habit formation experiment, they all point to the same conclusion Jung reached 100 years ago. You can't permanently suppress parts of yourself. You can only integrate them or suffer their return. The 90-day shadow cycle. Is that return inevitable, mechanical, precise, unless you integrate first, now? Here's what I need to tell you about implementing this protocol. Here's what nobody mentions when they talk about shadow work and neuroscience integration. It gets messy before it gets clean. When you start acknowledging your shadow, all the parts you've been suppressing, I start speaking up, and not quietly, loudly, demandingly. The part that wants to sleep in will scream for attention. The part that craves comfort will fight for dominance. The spontaneous self you've been optimizing away will demand to be heard. This is what Jung called the descent into the unconscious, what modern psychology calls the integration crisis, what everyone who actually does deep work experiences, but influences never show. Your Instagram feed is full of day 30 transformations. Nobody posts their day 45 integration crisis, when their shadow breaks through mid-protocol, and everything feels like it's falling apart. But this falling apart is the integration beginning, the warfare ending, the negotiations starting. If you quit here, you're back to 90-day cycles, forever. If you push through, with curiosity instead of discipline, you're on the path to true sustainability. Michael, the engineer I mentioned, his integration crisis hit on day 38. He wanted to quit, sleep in, abandon everything. For 3 days, his shadow was screaming, but instead of suppressing or surrendering, he journaled. Every resistance, every desire, every part of him that hated his 5 a.m. wake-up, and what he discovered changed everything. His shadow wasn't against optimization, it was against optimization that ignored his humanity. His resistance wasn't laziness, it was wisdom. His desire to sleep in wasn't weakness. It was his body saying, the 5 a.m. wake time ignored his natural chronotype. So Michael adjusted, moved wake time to 6 a.m. Found research showing morning routines work at any consistent time. His shadow quieted, his routine sustained. That's integration, not defeating the shadow, listening to it, learning from it, adjusting the protocol to honor both optimization and humanity. This is what sustainable change looks like. Messy, negotiated, human. The polished 90-day transformations you see online, they're all heading toward day 91 crashes because they're suppression. Not integration, warfare, not wisdom. Real transformation includes the integration crisis, demands it, can't happen without it. So, if you start this protocol and your shadow starts screaming, that's not failure. That's the beginning of real change, the kind that doesn't reset every quarter. Now here's the super important part. Nobody wants to fund research on. Here's what threatens the entire optimization industry. People who complete shadow integration don't just sustain their morning routines. They need 50% fewer optimization protocols overall. Because once you're not fighting yourself, you need way less structure to function, way less discipline to perform. way less external motivation to grow. The integrated person is self-sustaining. The suppressed person is market-dependent. Guess which one the self-help industry wants you to be? This is why Andrew Huberman can talk about neuroplasticity for hours, but shadow work barely gets mentioned. Why biohackers sell you supplements, but not integration protocols. Why productivity systems focus on external structure, but never internal alignment. The business model needs your internal war. Your day 91 crashes, your eternal quest for the next optimization. Carl Jung threatened that model completely, not by being anti-science, but by being deeper science. By understanding that the brain isn't just neurotransmitters and neural pathways, it's a meaning-making system that will eventually rebel against any protocol that ignores its wholeness. And here's what makes this so powerful. Once you understand the 90-day shadow cycle, you can never unsee it. You'll notice it everywhere. In fitness transformations that crash after 3 months, in productivity systems that stop working after a quarter, in relationships that explode after 90 days of suppressed resentments. The shadow cycle runs everything: personal development, business growth, creative projects, relationships. All of it operates on this 90-day integrate or collapse pattern. The people who make it long-term aren't the most disciplined, they're the most integrated. They didn't defeat their shadows, they danced with them. And once you become one of these people, you realize something profound. The goal was never optimization, it was wholeness. Huberman's protocols are tools for wholeness, not ends in themselves. Jung understood this. Modern neuroscience is slowly learning it. You can use morning routines to build discipline, or you can use them to practice integration, to create daily rituals where your conscious and unconscious selves collaborate instead of compete. That's what the shadow conscious morning routine really is. Not just a protocol, a practice of daily integration, a way to honor both your drive and your resistance, your structure and your spontaneity, your optimization and your humanity. This is what sustainable transformation looks like. Not polished, not perfect, not a highlight reel, real, messy, negotiated, whole. And here's what I need you to do with this information. Here's what will determine whether you're still doing this work in a year or crashed on day 91 of your next protocol. Stop thinking of your shadows as the enemy. Start seeing it as data. Every resistance is information. Every desire to quit is your psyche communicating. When you want to sleep in, don't just force yourself awake. Ask why. What is sleep protecting? What rest are you denying yourself? How can your morning routine include restoration, not just optimization? When you hate the cold shower, don't just push through. Explore the resistance. What comfort are you sacrificing? Is there a way to build resilience that doesn't feel like punishment? Can discipline include kindness? This is shadow work at the neurological level. Not therapy sessions, not years of analysis, just daily curiosity about your resistance. 5 minutes of journaling, one question: what part of me is resisting, and what is it trying to protect? That question, asked daily, prevents 90-day crashes. Because it integrates continuously, it gives your shadow voice before it needs to scream. It negotiates before the rebellion. This is how you sustain, not through more discipline, through more dialogue, with yourself, with your shadow, with all the parts of you that optimization tried to eliminate. And when you do this, something remarkable happens. The protocols start working better. not despite the shadow dialogue, but because of it. Your morning routine becomes more consistent, your energy more stable, your motivation more intrinsic, because you're not fighting yourself anymore. This is what Carl Jung promised, what Andrew Huberman's neuroscience confirms, what nobody sells, because it makes you independent. Integration is freedom from 90-day cycles, from endless optimization, from the tyranny of the perfect protocol. The question isn't whether your shadow will emerge. It will on day 91. Like clockwork, the question is whether you've been integrating all along. So when day 91 comes, it's not a crash, but a deepening. Not warfare, but wisdom. Not resistance, but evolution. This is your choice. Suppress or integrate, crash or sustain, warfare or wholeness. The neuroscience proves integration works. Carl Jung's psychology explains why your day 91 will show you which path you chose. Choose integration. Choose dialogue. Choose wholeness. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your evolution waiting to happen. If this research into the 90-day shadow cycle revealed something most people never see, if knowing why protocols self-destruct exactly when they do gives you an advantage others don't have, consider supporting this work. The super thanks button below isn't just appreciation. It's you saying, continue revealing what the optimization industry hides. Continue connecting Carl Jung's century-old wisdom with Andrew Huberman's modern neuroscience. Every 90-day revelation like this costs time. Most creators don't want to invest, requires reading Jung's complete works alongside Stanford's latest studies, demands seeing patterns the market wants suppressed because integrated people don't buy quarterly program renewals. When you hit that golden heart button, you're not just funding a video, you're funding someone willing to tell you that sustainable optimization requires shadow integration, that your 90-day crashes aren't failure, but mechanical inevitability, that the industry profits from your suppression. You're not a passive consumer. You're an active researcher of your own depth, someone who values truth over polished transformation promises. Be part of what makes honest optimization research possible. Support work that integrates Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman instead of just riding trends. One last question that will determine your protocol's fate. One question Huberman's research can't answer, but Jung's psychology demands. On day 91, when your shadow emerges, will you see it as failure or as information? Will you double down on suppression or open up to integration? Will you restart the same protocol for another 90-day crash or begin the messy work of sustainable wholeness? Your answer determines everything. Your longevity, your sanity, your sustainability. The shadow cycle will run its course. That's mechanics, that's neuroscience, that's inevitable. But whether it destroys your protocol or deepens your practice, that's choice, that's consciousness, that's integration. Comment below. Which protocol stopped working for you on day 91? Sun exposure, cold showers, dopamine fasting. Let's see how universal the shadow cycle really is. Team still works versus team shadow took over. And if you're brave, tell us what your shadow was trying to say when the protocol crashed. Because that resistance is data. That rebellion is wisdom. That breakdown is your breakthrough, waiting to be integrated. It's not a failure, it's an opportunity. Welcome to Shadow Conscious Optimization, where dopamine protocols don't crash every 90 days. Because you stopped fighting the very parts of yourself that optimization tried to eliminate. You see, true optimization isn't about eradicating parts of you. It's about understanding and integrating them. where Andrew Huberman's cutting-edge neuroscience meets Carl Jung's profound depth psychology. It's the meeting point of science and soul, of the tangible and the intangible, where discipline dances with desire instead of warring with it. Imagine the power of harnessing your desires instead of suppressing them. It's a tango, not a tug of war. This is sustainable transformation, messy, real, whole. It's not a quick fix. It's a lifelong journey of self-discovery and acceptance. Your day 91 is coming. Be ready, not with more discipline, but with more integration. Prepare yourself, not by doubling down on rigid routines, but by embracing the complexity of your inner landscape, shadow and consciousness, structure and spontaneity, optimization and humanity. Finding the balance is key, all of it, integrated, sustained, free. This is the path to lasting change, a path paved with self-compassion and a willingness to embrace the totality of who you are.